Hi everyone, welcome to Difference Frames the World, a channel to view the world from a different angle. Today, we discuss the export story of Nvidia H200 AI chips, one of the strangest tech battles of our time. If you've been following global tech news lately, you might have noticed one particular phrase cropping up everywhere: H200 export to China. We made a video before about Donald Trump greenlighting Nvidia H200 export to China, with a 25% cut from the total sales. Viewers can watch it by following the link in the pinned comments to understand the background. It's not just a chip story, but a microcosm of US-China tech competition, geopolitical brinkmanship, corporate strategy, supply chains, and the future of artificial intelligence itself. In a few short weeks, what seemed like a breakthrough turned into a full-blown drama, marked by sudden reversals, national security hot takes, and raw market realities. So, what happened? Why has a single Nvidia chip become such a flashpoint? And what does it say about where tech power is headed? First off, let's back up a bit. H200 is one of the company's most powerful AI processors. Although it's not the absolute flagship, the H200 is extremely capable, far more powerful than older models like the H20 or H100, and it's widely used for training large AI models and other serious AI workloads. That makes it very valuable to AI developers worldwide. For years, China's AI industry has been starved for high-end chips because US export controls have tightened significantly as Washington sought to curb China's access to advanced computing hardware. That was part of a broader policy focused on national security and economic competition. But by late 2025, that status quo began to shift, or seemed to shift. On December 8, 2025, a big thing happened. US President Donald Trump announced that the US government would allow Nvidia to export H200 AI chips to China, but only under strict conditions. The conditions were unusual and pretty heavy. Case-by-case licensing. Instead of a blanket approval, each export would require a license demonstrating compliance with national security criteria. Third-party testing. Chips had to get tested by an independent lab in the US before shipping. No military use. Buyers had to promise not to use the chips for defense or sensitive military applications. Volume limits. China was allowed to buy no more than 50% of the volume Nvidia sold in the United States. A 25% fee. Nvidia would pay a 25% share of the revenue from China H200 sales to the US government. Trump and his team framed this move as a balanced deal, letting the American tech industry sell abroad without giving away too much advanced capability. But critics immediately pounced. Once the possibility opened up, Chinese tech giants moved fast. According to reporting and market chatter from December, companies like ByteDance and Alibaba were lining up to buy massive quantities of H200 chips, potentially numbering in the millions, with multi-billion-dollar deals on the line. Nvidia reportedly told Chinese customers it planned to start shipments by mid-February 2026, just before the CNY, China's Lunar New Year holiday, using on-hand inventory. Industry insiders estimated initial deliveries could be tens of thousands of chips, with the potential for orders in the six-figure unit range and tens of billions in revenue. For Nvidia CEO Jensen Huang, this was a big deal. Losing access to China for top-tier data center chips was a major blow to the company's growth and market share. Getting back in it, even with limits, could be huge for revenue and help maintain Nvidia's dominance in AI computing. Then came the twist no one expected. Just days after US regulators finalized the export policy, reports surfaced that Chinese customs officers were telling Nvidia that H200 shipments were not permitted entry. That sounds like a ban, even if Beijing hasn't issued one officially yet. On January 14, 2026, multiple outlets, including Reuters, reported that Chinese authorities blocked H200 imports at customs and instructed domestic tech firms not to buy the chips unless necessary. In practical terms, shipments couldn't clear customs. Nvidia's key component suppliers paused production of H200 parts because no one knew whether the chips would ever be delivered. Chinese companies waiting for deliveries were told to hold off on placing new orders. And just like that, what seemed like a breakthrough became a stalemate, maybe worse. This rapid reversal left a lot of people scratching their heads, but there are a few strategic reasons that make sense. China has been pouring resources into its own AI hardware, from startups to big state-backed projects. Allowing millions of Nvidia chips in could reduce the incentive to buy domestic alternatives, lock developers into Nvidia's ecosystem, which many Chinese teams already find attractive, and risk a long-term dependency on US supply. By blocking H200 imports now, China may be telling the world it wants to build its own chips and AI infrastructure on its terms. That fits with broader industrial strategy goals. That accords with commentary from market analysts, who see China's move as part of a push for greater self-reliance versus reliance on foreign semiconductors. If Chinese firms suddenly bought hundreds of thousands of H200 chips, it might crowd out domestic AI accelerators in early customer engagements, leaving local startups and established chipmakers struggling to find early adopters. Blocking the US chips now could give Chinese hardware ecosystem players, who are still maturing, more breathing room to innovate and scale. That's exactly the kind of strategic calculus seen in other industries, too, where governments choose controlled opening rather than unrestricted imports. Some analysts think Beijing might be using this moment as leverage, especially amid broader semiconductor geopolitics. By holding off on approvals, China keeps the US uncertain and maintains bargaining chips in high-stakes tech negotiations. From a business perspective, this uncertainty is a nightmare. Nvidia had geared up for production, even reactivating the supply chain for H200 chips in January 2026. Its CEO, Jensen Huang, said demand was very high, and that the company was ready to ship once all regulatory approvals were finalized, both in the US and in China. But with Chinese customs blocking deliveries and no official timeline for reversal, production has been slowed or put on hold. Suppliers have paused work because building chips that sit in warehouses is expensive and risky. That's not just a temporary hiccup, it directly hits Nvidia's ability to capture a massive potential revenue stream, satisfy large enterprise customers in China, and maintain its competitive advantage in global AI markets. The China market is huge. Before the export restrictions, Nvidia held a dominant share of AI data center chips in China. Losing that market to competitors is a big thing for the US tech giant. Getting back into the China market would help Nvidia hold that leadership. But right now, it's still up in the air. So far, we've talked about China blocking shipments, but let's rewind to why the US ever allowed this in the first place. The US government's formal revision of export rules in January 2026 showed a clear shift. American regulators had been tightening controls on AI chips for years. But by early 2026, a few things were in play. Industry lobbying by Nvidia and others argues that exporting H200 in a controlled manner wouldn't threaten America's national security. The US government codified a new policy that permits some advanced chips to be sent to China under strict conditions. There was recognition that AI competition wasn't just about denial, it was about balancing commercial interests with national security concerns. Keeping China entirely excluded may accelerate China's self-sufficiency, something the US actually doesn't want. So this policy was an attempt to thread a needle, allow trade, protect security, and maintain American tech leadership. But again, the devil is in the details. The H200 saga isn't just about one product. It's a signpost for the bigger trend: AI chips are now geopolitically sensitive exports. They're not smartphones. They're not laptops. These processors are foundational to the most advanced AI research and applications, and whoever controls them has huge leverage over global innovation. That is why leaders in Washington, including some powerful voices in Congress and the tech industry, are wary. Some argue exporting advanced AI chips to China could weaken US national security. Others say restricting exports could force China to build its own chips faster, reducing US influence. In fact, some US tech leaders have publicly criticized sales to China as akin to selling advanced weapons, given the strategic implications. So policymakers on both sides of the Pacific are trying to balance security concerns, commercial competitiveness, industrial strategy goals, domestic ecosystem development, and international diplomacy. The US has put in place a framework to allow exports. And Chinese companies want the chips. The demand is real. But right now, Chinese customs are not clearing the chips, and companies are being told to pause orders unless necessary, as we said earlier. There are several possible scenarios here. The block or hold is temporary while Beijing figures out usage limits and regulatory guardrails. China could eventually allow selective imports for specific commercial use. Or China might tighten the screws further to protect its domestic industry. Experts outside the immediate political sphere also note that the new U.S. export policy has its own contradictions, suggesting it is hard to implement in practice without blocking most exports anyway. So it might be a stalemate for now, or a slow drip of approvals rather than a flood of shipments. The H200 story highlights several big trends. First, the AI supply chain is now strategic. Semiconductors, especially AI chips, are no longer just commercial products. They're security assets. And exporting them means weighing economic benefit against strategic risk. Second, China wants tech independence. Beijing clearly values its domestic semiconductor development and is willing to trade short-term computing power for long-term autonomy. Third, the US is trying to maintain a competitive edge. Washington wants to protect its own lead but doesn't want to cut off trade entirely, because that could backfire on industry dominance. Fourth, the world is entering a multipolar tech order. It's increasingly clear that a single standard or country won't dominate the global AI ecosystem anymore. China, the US, Europe, Japan, and others are all cultivating their own ecosystems. What started as a promising breakthrough, US export approval for Nvidia's H200 chip, has rapidly turned into a high-stakes standoff. China's blocking of shipments despite US approval shows how technology trade has become deeply intertwined with national strategies. For Nvidia, the outcome will shape its participation in the world's biggest AI market. For China, the move reinforces a push toward technological self-reliance. For the US, the saga highlights how hard it is to balance economic opportunity with strategic caution. And for the rest of the world, it's a reminder that in today's tech landscape, chips aren't just components, they're chess pieces. And no one's quite sure who will make the final winning move.